All right, this is Esper, and I'm back for what I call my higher education compendium. There are plenty of content creators like Grobs that have made comprehensive, literal A to Z new player guides. But I believe there's a gap for explanation of a little bit more in-depth explanation of the why, how the game plays, in certain ways, but also, when dealing with other players, with dealing with other guilds, how things in TNL have turned out, how the way they are, how they are today, and just giving more insights and peeling behind the curtain. And some of this information has been gatekept because honestly, it's viewed as an information advantage, offensive, or people just don't want to acknowledge harsh truths. I'm going to do my best to peel behind the curtain in a relatively shorter format. Folks can draw their own conclusions, but I hope this is more informative to the community, but also to AGS and Tico and AGS at large. Table of contents. Why TNL? What TNL is. Why TNL focuses on specialization. Beyond the tank healer DPS holy trinity, the roles of TNL, key stat build and interplay. TNL is not a mobile stat check game. We're not playing Raid Shadow Legends here. Number 6, behind the curtain, how guilds are organized. 7, I promise, brief primer TNL politics. And 8, my conclusion, current call. I'm here for the people snub from the draft NA's tournament, and I'll share some personal anecdotes. I've been there too. First, TNL, front and center on the official, Steam page. Join massive battles, not fight one-on-ones. Speaks for itself. Form alliances to rule together. Yes. It says, will you carve your niche as a solo player? Every game says that. This is corporate speak. EVE Online, one of the least friendly games to solo players, literally says this too. You can have total freedom to forge your own path. But is EVE meant for solo players? No. This is corporate speak. Guild-based PvP for every ambition. Guild, not solo or duo. That's what they advertise. Okay, what TNL fits TNL's design? Trust the process. Each player matters from the setup to actually fighting the battle. The scrimmages, the war games, everything in the guild matters. One build can't beat the whole game. That's the beauty of TNL. Pay to win, quote unquote, only gets you so far. You can't. There's no amount of money you can pay throw into this game to actually beat the entire player base or to quote unquote win the game. It's an EVE Online night. You fight the big battles while having mandatory alts or spreadsheets galore. Game knowledge is rewarded. Doesn't every game need to be my same? This is my primary criticism of Dank. Dank was selfish. Went onto the Tico panel and promoted. I should be able to do damage and kill lots of players on invasion. We do not need solo players to scale and scat check and be able to kill entire parties, entire guilds by themselves. There are plenty of other games that let you do that. Black Desert Online, Raid Shadow Legends, Clash of Clans, Aeon 2, a lot of these mobile games. Because TNO is a group game, there's no true auto pay to win. So apparently, Dank views this as a negative. I view this as a positive. Sorry, TNL does not have unique and difficult complex PvE. This is true. I don't think it ever will. This is not Final Fantasy. This is not RuneScape. This is not World of Warcraft. You do have to work with others. Some people view this as a positive. It's okay to play other games without forcing every game to match what you want. Because customers should have choice and what kind of being able to pick what gives it. Not every single game has to be like freaking BDO or Raid Shadow Legends, where you have to be able to. If you pay enough money, one player can kill everything. For Pete's sake. Okay, number 2. Why TNA focuses on specialization. Everyone wants to be able to the main character. I'm the superstar. I do everything. Everyone wants to be Maverick. There is so much that goes into what take the example of Maverick. Of a top top fighter pilot. For example, the AWACS, the radar, your healer, the mechanic fixing the plane, the tanks providing the supply, like of the clumps, like the fuel tanker, the general, the guild leaders, and why TM focus, and also that kind of also goes to, because the game is fought with guilds, with big groups. There's more value in someone knowing their specific role and doing it well, because you have the benefit of a large amount of people. You're leading an army. You're fighting a war. You're basically fighting like a modern war. You're not playing League of Legends solo queue. Each person has a role. I'd rather have a pure dedicated healer and a pure dedicated DPS than two people trying to both heal and DPS that don't do either well. Okay, beyond the Holy Trinity, the roles of TNL. Tanks do so much more than just pushing forward or taking damage in this game. You have your compass, you said your pusher. Peel tanks, very underrated. Tanks, a lot of tanks still have a hard time understanding. It's just as important as peeling and protecting your key players as it is to push forward. The cappers, boss contribution holder, area denial, warden, steelheart, and berserker all can do this, preventing your enemy from entering a zone or a particular choke point. This is very important in this zone. Healers, you have your pocket oracle seeker. I think pocket or seeker is underrated for certain kill squads. Everyone forgot about sidebar. Everyone forgot about deadly marker. I feel like as a skill, reduces target shield health received by 80%. Also increases people targeting this person with the marker. Increases the crit chance or hit chance who is hitting them. Seekers also has the cleanse, and you still single target wall. You remove you remove the stun, for example, off your Ravager. You put the deadly marker on the damn enemy Oracle or mage, and you enable your Ravager to go in and knock them out. People really have forgotten about Seeker. My starting Spickers catcher. I call it the Oracle Cordy Spinner battery. This is not just because of shielding, but because of also the stun, the additional stun and collision resist that the upgraded Cordy Orb gives, in addition to the Cordy Wand. The timing on the Cordy Orb CC immunity is so sensitive that's part of the reason why these Cordy spinning groups are truly they have to play with certain people, or it's just extremely difficult to find generalists that get a generalist healer that has both the right gear but also the ability to slot into a Cordy spinner party. It's Cordy spot party because they're so peculiar or particular to the individual spinner's preferences and the tight timing windows of a Cordy spinner. Tank healing party, tanks for Karu, kill squad, main ball. You can't get enough healers at the end of the day. DPS, there are your comp and AoE nukers. I'll go into why, war mages are so important these days. Single target assassin. I don't want my Ravager thinking they're meant to kill groups. They're meant to kill, for example, the war mage. You pick out a target and you knock it out. Shut down corner. Ravagers have some limitations to killing, for example, healers. Scorpions, high-end Scorpion can step in with the heal cuts and the shield cuts and beat that along with killing any individual non-tank player. I'm going to talk about curse bombers a little bit here, because I feel like this was a role that was warped by the single player experience. Curse bombers were really meant as a tank busters. They're the javelin missile. The combo is there's so many skills that have to land and set up for a Curse Bomber to be able to one-shot somebody. That's why it's virtually impossible for Curse Bombers to kill DPS, but DPS are either going to kill the Curse Bomber or they're going to move around before the Curse Bomber can land their combo. But tanks are often, going into particular locations, so they're going to, be in the location for a while, and they also move slower than, let's say, a Ravager. The problem is that the solo player experience was warped by being able to one shot from Curse Bombers, so they complain on Reddit to official AGS that shouldn't be able to get one shot by somebody without understanding what the tank busting role of Curse Bombers was, and Curse Bombers got nerfed to the ground. If you actually make Curse Bombers, and ironically, a lot of these solo players complain about tanks doing damage these days. Curse bombing should be brought to the game. They fit that particular role of being a tank buster, and I do think that bring back Curse bombers would help bring balance to the game. Key stat and build interplay. Evasion and CC resistance are all or nothing. For example, it doesn't matter if you have 4K evasion or 4K melee evasion or 1 melee evasion. If your opponent's hit chance is above 4K, you get no benefit whatsoever. Your evasion stat is absolutely useless. Same thing with CC resistance. In contrast, endurance and heavy attack evasion do get you partial value. Even if your endurance and heavy attack evasion don't exceed your opponent's head critical chance and heavy attack chance, entirely, it still reduces the crit chance and the heavy attack chance. I think a good balance here, or a balancing move here, is for CC resistance to act like endurance and heavy attack evasion. Because there's no real effective diminishing returns of CC caps, it's not effectively implemented in this game. Giving CC resistance partial benefits, I do think would be a benefit would be a benefit to this game. But evasion still should remain all or nothing. Why? Because it's pure stat check RNG. You don't have to push any button to get the benefit of evasion. You evasion inherently as a stat check stat is game warping for a dynamic game like this that's supposed to emphasize organization, knowing your role, and player knowledge. If high evasion players were able to deal a lot of damage, or evasion somehow got more impressive, you're removing player agency, player knowledge, and player skill, and you're just rolling the dice over and over. We're basically playing Raid Shadow Legends at this point. And I think a lot of people may have, these solo players like Dank may have like fun for 1 or 2 days, but a lot of people will quit. After the instant gratification wears off, and that would just kill the game. That would just kill the game. Jay, who did a good job of explaining evasion too, because your opponent's hit can never get down to zero. Law of large numbers, sheer attack speed is one of the most effective counters to evasion, because the more chances you have to hit, the more times you're hitting someone, within a certain time period, it's just more likely that one of these are actually going to hit eventually. And evasion players don't have many inherent defensive once you get past the evasion, so they're going to die. This is also why crossbows arguably more oppressive, because they dealt so much damage with law of large numbers that evasion didn't mean anything, because they're landing 20 attacks within the span of 10 seconds. If you want to nerf crossbows, you reduce the attack frequency significantly. Shielding is so powerful because it operates like shielding in this game. It's a second HP bar. You have to break through the shields to get to the HP. Healers are nothing wrong with the rest of the party. This is something that I learned too, from talking to people both through experience, and then I was on the other side of it. For these higher end mid-range guilds and top guilds that I've been in, I made recommendations to not recruit people or cut people, because they did not cut healers, even though these guilds need healers, because they did not understand. There's no real penalty for dying. Personally, you don't lose gold. You don't lose lucent. You don't lose you don't directly lose lucent. You don't lose durability. You don't lose experience. You don't lose your own gear from dying. So healers should not be afraid of dying. But healers need to enable the rest of the need to understand. They need to be able to enable the rest of the party. Playing just for yourself and just healing yourself does no good whatsoever in actually advancing the guild, the alliance, the groups, your party's objective to try to win the fight. If you are just building the healing build and playing just for yourself, this does no one any good, and you should not be surprised when you get caught or you get specifically told or brought in we need to coach you up here and explain that you need to play with your party, help your party. Your tanks have to do more than just take damage. They need to do something else. That's why, for example, a high HP Templar that just heals themselves but does nothing else is actually useless. People are going to ignore you, and you're not doing anything to impact the rest of the game. DPS need to know what their role assignment is, and not every target or kill is a good kill. I don't want my Cody spinners focusing on just one person because they dislike them. They need to focus on the right groups and target areas and kill 12 people at the same time. Single player contrast, single player. I don't want my Ravager thinking that they can suddenly kill clumps. Like that's not, or kill six people at the same time. That's not what they're designed for. If I no free lunch, trade offs are part of the game. DPS, if you build all defensive, you should not be surprised when you're not able to kill people. Again, this is not a game where you can do everything and everything. If you want a game there are other games that can do that. Play RuneScape, play BDO, for example, play Raid Shadow Legends, or some other mobile game. Play Aeon 2. Okay, some key items. The orb mages. Yeah, imagine reactivating the AOE voice slash, and the second activation deals 420% base damage. These are why these AOE damage dealers on par with Cordy spinners. This is my oracle. I have less than 5 seconds on the primary shield skill. Reasonable cooldown and attack speed, and 188% shield health. And I'm not glass oracle build, by the way. I still have defensive stats, and some people have a test like unless it's Raichu, smile Raichu, stay away from me, please. Unless it's Raichu, I am not scared of anybody. One on one, and I don't want to get spun on by Cordy spinners too, but I can survive getting spun on by a Cody spinner. I don't want I'd rather not get spun on, but I can. I mean, some people say that that's unfair that oracles can kind of have their cake and eat it too in this regard. I'll just say this: if you want to nerf oracles, you have to change some other aspects of the game, bring some things back. Like for example, bring back curse bombers so tanks are meaningfully killable, so that you're not dependent on glass cannon DPS having to kill tanks. This is part 5. TN is not a stack check game. Again, I talked about this early on. Dank, look, Dank wants a game like Aeon 2, like where one player can 1v8 because the stat checking on gear is ridiculous. People might view this as a personal attack. I'm going to bluntly say this: Dank is selfishly promoting evasion players being able to do high damage at the same time, basically promoting stat checking, because other games that have this kind of stat checking are also extremely paid to win. I mean, just the idea of paying for stats inherently is the more money you pay towards the game, the higher bill you have to stat checking. It's also harder. Perhaps Dank, there's always a bigger fish. Dank knows that there are players with bigger wallets and more willing to spend in those mobile games. Oil money is not a meme, or oil prints, or like Aeon 2 with the big, career spenders than him. So he's trying to promote this philosophy in TNL. There's so many bad reasons why for this. I'm not going to harp on it, but TNL is not meant to be a stack check game, and please stop. Okay, behind the curtain, how a guild is organized. I personally think guilds are kind of like law firms, and the reason why is that people think that even like the high-end guilds are hierarchical, but they're not. Everyone has a say to some extent. For example, if all the healers in your guild want to walk out, it does not matter who you are or what the name of the guild leader is. Your guild just fell apart. So it's more like a law firm, this aspect, that you have a bunch of partners and attorneys, associates, counsel, paralegals, etc. They have to all get along, and they, and to some extent, or if they don't get along, at least you can navigate the internal politics, and just keep it all enough close enough together that people are willing to do their role and advance the firm at the end of the day, somehow in some way. Top 5 reasons why guilds disband. 1, fatigue. This kind of relates to a lot, but your logistics officer got tired, the guild leader got tired, your healers got tired of playing the game, your top DPS got tired of playing the game. Fatigue is underrated. It overlaps with a lot, but we're all human. We're not AIs playing this game. Fatigue matters. 2, losing. I'm glad Tico's aware of this. Explains for itself. 3, loot. 4, poaching. It reminds me of mid-sized law firms get forced into bankruptcy or disband because the top guilds took all their talent and they just can't bring in new good people that are good. Not enough new people to come in, and not enough new replacements. And finally, a corner case like sex scandal. It's fun to talk about, but it rarely ever happens to disband a guild. Okay, a primer to TNL politics. Speaking of law firms, I feel like the dynamics. A lot of times actually we've seen it in NAEs. It's kind of like an episode of Suits. By the way, quick sidebar. Aerolite reminds me of Lois Lit. Why? Because yes, he will yell at guild members. He'll yell at the associates, but he's trying to give them constructive advice because he wants them to do better, and it's coming from a good place. At least when it comes to giving advice, to those members and Twitch, Aerolite. You just got Aerolite up. Okay, first, the small casual firms. They remind me of your neighborhood personal injury firm. This is actually the best way to gear up, get loot, get loosened. For example, it's just basic economics. The less people you have to share with, the more that goes in your pocket. It's like a personal injury firm with one attorney, one paralegal. They get that wrongful death case that settles, and their continuous fee is, $25 million. They just made more from one case than the managing partner of a large firm made, for an entire decade. One person that successfully gets a pillage point, and that one person guild gets more loosened from that pillage point themselves than someone large guild gets from their share of loosened from a siege from the last 10 sieges. There's nothing wrong with that. Number two, the mid-range guilds low. This is the vast majority of TNL guilds. They can beat them on every small guild, but there's always a bigger fish. They're always stuck in this weird place. They're usually also the first type of guild that players who want to quote unquote be comp go into. There's very few players that make the jump from a small guild or from out of nowhere to quote unquote big law, the top guild. Do you want to move up and go hard? All the time sacrifices, the TLGM, the loot council, scheduling. Can you risk losing? Can you protect what you have from poaching or invasion from the big guilds? Twitch streamer Ruthless has some insights into playing with mid-range guilds, and definitely a good additional resource on this. Number two, and finally, big law, the top guilds. There's a lot of work behind the scenes required to run of these. What big guilds do is always they have to feed the beast. They have to feed loot. They have to feed wins. They have to keep they have to keep getting active players. They have to keep their members interested. What they do, a lot of decisions that these big guilds made, alliances to try to quote unquote kill competition. You're moving servers to beat up on certain guilds, etc. Not fighting other big guilds. A lot of this boils down to they always just have to feed the beast, and that's why they made the decisions they made. I'll talk with Twitch streamer Vulnerable. He was in top guild T2 tournament. He's no longer in tier, but he has a lot of insights and experience that he can share on this. Dealing with potential server killing events. I was in a mid-range guild 9 to 5, but they were constantly chased by the big law tier, and they're driven into the ground. And then they eventually disbanded. This is just an unfortunate reality of to feed the beast, to give your members content. It is always easier as a top guild to beat up on mid-range guilds than to fight other big guilds. I mean, people don't like saying this, but that's the truth of the matter. These big firms, these big guilds keep their guilds interested a lot of times by finding mid-range guilds to beat up on. They're fighting other big guilds where there's a risk of losing and quote unquote risk of mutually assured destruction. The term server health is thrown around like climate change. It is absolutely meaningless. It's a propaganda term. There's always someone willing to cut a deal. Esper's cardinal principles. There's always a bigger fish. You are your own best advocate, but the meta and guilds needs exist for a reason. You cannot be too stubborn in this. The guilds, the folks running guilds have to think more about themselves, and they have to think about the big picture. If you're too stubborn, you're not willing to play the role they need. You should not be surprised. When you're not recruited, and you shouldn't take offense to that. But a lot of people do naturally, and it's a natural reaction. They have a hard time seeing past this. No free lunch, and finally, there's nothing wrong with taking a break and moving on if you truly don't want to play, can't play, whatever reason. Real life comes first, and I say this. Finally, the roster draft tournament. I am going to read the name of everyone who is not picked. There's a story behind everyone. I wish I had more time. I don't, but they at least all deserve to be named. Hopefully AGS will officially sponsor a tournament with more teams so a lot more people can participate. All the folks here, all the folks on this list are just as more valuable and not more valuable than the people pick. This community relies on people playing together, willing to participate, and willing to interact with each other. Without that, we don't have a game. Okay, Bushido Knight, Aqua Chile, Daddy War, Ganga Joku, Bell, More Bear, Raw Danky, X Shield Hero X, the Black Hokage, Jet Rocketeer, Xenon, Jams Joe, Reelix, Short Cheek Clapper, Deerfeet, Rackhill, Semi, Duck Ready, Cat Spectral Rogue, Big Boy Jorn, High Iowa Best, Jazza, Side Jeans, Troll, the True Trolls, Visenia, Whiskey Sour, Who Ate My Heels, Swoop, Suresh, Dog Bears, The Chemical Romance, Aladane Shadow, Jack and Jill Wees, Mara, Amayoji, Rogue Ring, Ditto, Dr. Nick, Setumi, AFK Kumar, Seb, Buffwin, Queen of Curses, APOC, Barrows, Big Squid, Giannino, Maddie, Raros, Senfu, Watt, Lionheart, Mishmura, Rocks, Roar, Beyblade, Overpowered, Electra, Alfu, Gazelle, Korean Characters, Aegis K, Fat Citrus, Hollow Knight, Night Ghost, Papel, Wildest, Doug Wildest himself, also a great Magic the Gathering player, Jaizu, X-Flame, Soxy, Download, Yunj, Zaitos, whoops, I skipped it. Soxy, Download, Jude, Zay, Chris Tobo, Nix, Regardless, Zaitos, Huni, Jackie, Ryuga, It's Me Go, Shinokami, Epoch, What, Juan, Ale, Dr. Merc. Ryto sent me this, and it's honestly so much to read, but this is absolutely amazing. Call out to specific players. Zay, Glass Cannon, Shadowheart, Cato, Berserker, very important. DFE, Solid Pusher, Jet Rocketeer, Jonathan Taze of TNL, two-way player. The definition of Head Chopper, Gandalf, Queen of Curses, Fate Citrus, a great Assassin Ravager, Night Ghost, Wild Beds, Yuga, Spinner, What, Skyra, Orb, Bow. I wouldn't sleep on this as a high hit club killer, by the way, and which may have a role going for killing berserkers? Question mark. And overpowered. Overpower is a fellow I used to play with 9 to 5. And I'm glad he's still around. A lot of folks at 9 to 5, moved on to bigger and better things, bigger and better guilds. This meant Exodus, Bow, Serrano's coming back, Purple, Blee, etc. All were 9 to 5 back in the day. I was glad to see there's still a lot of 9 to 5 folks around and doing well. I'm going to close with the personal anecdote about being stubbed and been there too. When the T2 tournament was announced and started, Gravity disbanded because Guttle got tired of the game, and basically the guild leader and the guild fell apart. I was not confident in my healing abilities, and I was not proven, having just only been 9 to 5, then 9 to 5 to Gravity at that point. I looked at the Beck sheet. I applied to Curse because one of the last war games Gravity had was of Curse, and Curse was up and coming guild. I thought I'm going to prove myself there, and they signed up for the tournament, and I was going to fight for a roster spot. Then after I transferred in, I found out that Velocity and Take Care were transferring into Allied Dragon and formed server killing alliance. No, everyone else released Infamy, Majin, etc. was leaving the server. I told Curse, do what's best for your guild. Leave me behind. I don't care if I'm in cooldown, not in the tournament. You have to do what's best for your guild against this. I think if Curse stayed in Snowburn at that point in time in May 2025, they honestly might have died. Curse left. They swapped places with Velocity, Allied Polarity instead, and they built to what they are today. I then made that T2 tournament preview May 2025, and I fully resigned myself to the fact that I may never play in the tournament. I don't know any streamers, and I was just going to talk about it. But I didn't apply it to Dragon. Airlight gave a chance. I made that video. I demonstrated the game knowledge, I guess, and I pressed somebody. There's hope for everyone.